I'm pleased to have Isis the Scholar join us tonight. Thank you so much for coming on Radio Zero to discuss a serious issue. Good evening.
Good evening, Donna.
Tell them what we're going to be discussing tonight.
Well, for me, I'm very concerned, as I'm sure without speaking for, a mass consensus of people, but I'm greatly concerned with accountability, especially going into the current presidential election. It really concerns me because if it's not being addressed now, it's not now, like they say. If not now, then when?
Right. We were actually connected. A big shout out to Keith from Up the Block, because that's how we started discussing this on his page. And I had said that I had posted up a petition calling for police accountability, and I really only had a handful of people. I think 3 or 4 people came forward. Very, very few. And that's kind of sad, isn't it, really?
Yes, it is.
You posted something on my page about everybody sharing 5 ways to raise police accountability. How did you actually word that?
I said top 5 ways to counteract police brutality.
There has to be more unity. What are your thoughts on that?
No, the unity is essential. We really, we can't. It's like when one is missing, then the puzzle is incomplete. So, that goes without saying. It's just about everyone being of the same accord. The thing that made the civil rights era and the civil rights movement so impactful, if I use that word, is because they're all of one accord. Maybe tactic-wise, maybe some people felt like, okay, well, this was a better tactic and that was a better tactic. They were full of state mindset. It wasn't this dissension that you see with Black Lives Matter movement where people are like, oh, well, yes, it does matter. Some people are saying it doesn't. We have to be of that one mind and one accord for it to be successful. And in terms of police accountability, it can be derisive in terms of people can't say, well, the police can be accountable. But we say, look, police have to be as accountable as any layperson who does this to, and I'm not saying that it's justified, but if someone does something to an officer, the rate goes up in terms of what is expected. I mean, it's swift and harsh. Sometimes sentencing, it's very immediate. There's no dragging the feet. But when officers unethical hurt, maim, or even kill individuals, particularly African-American males, there's always this debate going on about, well, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Well, this, that, and the other, and it gets swept under the rug. We cannot have a successful movement with this division.
Yeah, and you said it's the majority African-American males. African-American females are getting it too. That's kind of sad also. But yes, I see what you mean about the majority being African-American males. But I wanted to mention about the Caucasians specifically that are complaining about Black Lives Matter as opposed to All Lives Matter. It's like seeing somebody getting beaten up over here on your left. And over here on your right, you see a kid swinging, and you look over and see the kid swinging happily in the park and go, oh, look over there. Isn't that adorable? That life matters, too.
Exactly.
It's a world of difference. You're seeing people abused, and you're looking and say, but all lives matter? Yeah, we know that. We know that, right? But this is the culture that is being abused. You and I both lived in England, right? I noticed by your page, and it wasn't to my mind. I didn't see it. Did you see that level of abuse and horror going on?
Not
over
at
there?
all. Not at all. That's my point exactly. In some of my posts on Facebook, I'm very adamant about that in terms of how law is disseminated. internationally versus nationally versus, across the country. But when I lived in England, I never saw, with maybe the exception of occasional, I say palace guards, maybe carrying the swords, but it wasn't like they weren't around the general public. The officers were carrying, batons. So it didn't feel it wasn't a threatening environment. You know what I mean? Even when I went to Amsterdam, when I went to Paris, I did not feel like being afraid or being constantly on edge that you have here.
Right. Or being pulled over to give you a heart attack over there.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it's good for me to speak with you about this because you had first-hand view of it as well. But here are 2 point of views. Both of us have seen it from different perspectives. Mine from a white's perspective, yours from an African American's perspective. And you saw it. And, it's incredible. When I came back here to the land of my birth in 2009, I was shocked. I was shocked and horrified at the escalation of it all. And so it's kind of like we went backwards from the civil rights movement. It's gone right back, hasn't it?
Yes. And I've said that many times. It almost feels like I stepped back about 50, 60 years. I'm in segregated, although it was all across the country. I'm just thinking how it was televised and became more prevalent, was known to be more prevalent in the southern states. But here we are, 2016, and it's happening across the country. You know what I mean? And that's the sad and the scary part.
And like you said, it really is going to take some minds getting together because I see a lot of hate coming out of all this too. And now it's getting to be like what people say, well, forget the slavery era. Forget all that stuff. It's gone now. It's finished. But they're not seeing what's happening right here and now. They're not seeing what's going on right under their noses. And we all need to pull together because there is, like we said, there's strength in numbers. We are willing. Why can't there be other people coming forward? I mean, this is all of our worlds,
Right. I think there is a lot of personalizing, you know what I mean? Sometimes people get caught up in, personal issues and lose focus on what is the mission. What is the objective? What are we all here for? Instead of getting caught up in, sidebar dialogue. Case in point, I shared something recently on a website, on a page I'm on, Black Educators Rock, and it became, somewhat debatable amongst some of the members because they were questioning the validity of the post, and I shared it in good faith from someone else, a relative of mine. I was willing to get up on the fact that the information, it wasn't so much the information, it was like, okay, the source, and that does make a difference. However, the information, even when I quoted other sources, well, I didn't quote, but I, list other sources, it's still up. And, okay, well, this is satire. Instead of looking at the fact that the individual, and it was President of the NRA, who made some rather strong rhetorical comments.
Oh, boy.
And that was what the whole issue was about. It wasn't the fact like, okay, I knew it was satire, but it was the fact that obviously he's made other comments to the point where he has a track record and someone can make a satirical commentary or op-ed piece about him. You know what I mean? It's like someone's writing something about Donald Trump. We know what Donald Trump's opinions and views are. So if someone were to write something, maybe it might be fictional, but it's still, the bottom line is some of his views are very xenophobic and, polarizing. You know what I mean? So it was the same thing that I was kind of trying to share when I shared this particular. And get so topic. I'm like, well, wait a minute now. I've given you a link to CBS.com. You can actually, compare the two, juxtapose if you want. But the bottom line is obviously this person feels comfortable to make hateful speech. We may be taking it out of context, the some of these other, satire-based pieces, it's fictional and this and that, but at the same time, it's still based on the character of this individual. You know what I'm saying? So we get off topic instead of looking at the fact like, hate speech is hate speech. Bottom line. Why are we splitting hairs?
Absolutely.
About this, and people do that a lot, especially when it's, a movement or what we call, nation building isn't always easy. The founding fathers of the Constitution, look how long it took them to draft it, and there were opposing viewpoints, but they still had to come together of one mind. And that's the thing.
That's so true. What is your opinion about what Snoop and Game did, going to the police department, along with the protest? Do you think that was a useful move to have a meet and greet?
Yeah, I think anytime you have someone that's a public figure, it doesn't necessarily have to be a political person because, artists are change makers and change agents. Anytime you can draw light or attention to particularly a very sensitive or volatile issue, think positive. Snoop and the Game are both, well-known rappers, entertainment public figures. It's like they're threatening in a way, you know what I mean? So they are able to bring a certain light to the controversy, whereas let's say, a member of, Black Lives Matter or maybe ACLU or any other organization may not have been received the same way. It's like someone now is like non-threatening. It's like, okay, why can't we do that and not be entertainers? You know what I mean? Why can't we have that sit down, town hall or what have you? Why can't we have those meetings? Because we have to admit, when it comes to, yes, I do believe my uncle's a retired officer, so I do see the value of all lives mattering, blue lives matter, but then you have to acknowledge my humanity as a person of color, that acknowledge that particularly, officers, I don't like to use the term good or bad because I think it's so subjective, but officers who are at least accountable and responsible, who say, look, then there's been posts that I've shared on my page where, there have been officers who come and say, look, we're not standing for this. Even with the possibility of being ostracized, but this isn't right, something not stop. We need more of that because then and only then is it going to be a fair and balanced discussion when both parties are admitting okay, I've been wronged or you've been wronged. What is the solution? And that's when I drafted the top 5 ways to counteract police brutality. That was my approach in terms of being a solutionist. What are we finding? What about the solution? How can we end this? How can we come to a happy medium? And until then, when the officers and police districts and departments are willing to acknowledge that some things have to change, because first of all, some of the way the training that goes into police academy, maybe that needs to be upgraded for the 21st century. Maybe some of their training is a little archaic. But how can we modernize it where they do have sensitivity training? Because right now, I feel it's very combative. You know what I mean? It's very combative, whereas if you look at other nations who have a very low crime rate, such as Norway, for example, they do things a little differently. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And what's so critical to look at what is being done right. And not just, we don't even have to look at an international community where states in the U.S. that have low percentages of crime. What are they doing right?
Right, absolutely. Look at the positive.
Yeah. Even there were officers, and one in particular, I don't remember his name. I was trying to pull it up on my Facebook page. He's lauded throughout the country. He's a Caucasian officer who's been in the force for 15 years. There's plenty of Facebook posts about him, and you see him in the community. You saw? I think I shared it.
Yes. That was heartwarming. Yes.
Yeah. And you see someone like him, and it's not about being a poster child. It's like saying, this is an example of positive policing. This isn't taking anything away from his role as an officer, but how can you come together in communities and make a positive impact, not just the children, but you are expected. Instead of coming in and being, threatening, combative, just having this negative aura. Well, that goes along with proper training. Okay?
Yes.
And that's so critical. We emphasize that because there are officers in many communities who aren't being lauded, who aren't maybe on the internet. Yes, the people know, like, oh, that's Officer so-and-so. Yeah, that's Officer so-and-so, because before, back in the day, long time ago, police used to walk the beat. And the officers that walked the beat, they got to know the individuals within that community. Got to see them enough where it was like, okay, the presence isn't threatening. It's like, all right, we respect him, we feel safe. And too many times, because of the whole lack of respecting Black Lives Matter, unfortunately, African-American communities, officers' presence have changed. You know what I mean? To the point where it's like it becomes threatening almost. There's a bit of hostility. So that has to change. Yes.
Yeah. They really, it's going to have to come from the top. But all of this complaining and arguing, and we are standing forward. But unless other people are going to calm down the hate side of things and get their minds together proactively, it's just going to get more. I can see more and more and more chaos coming out of all this, and that's what scares me. We need to open up some minds on, both from the official side of things and us commoners, the rest of us, to, and I mean, I'm perfectly willing to have a meeting and speak to the police and everything else. In fact, I have a police department right behind where I live. I often thought about maybe if I could just go and get a statement from them, or whether they'd be even willing to actually make some kind of positive statement, like we are doing our best to, help things in that direction or something. We just need some, because they're not talking to us. They're just staying, holding their ground, it seems to me. They're not talking to us and trying to open up with us,
Right. And that's the sad part, because I feel like that creates more of the dissension, that creates more of the negativity when you get this pushback of people, of, like you said, departments not willing to, budge. A lot of it is also a perspective. If the departments are teaching, as has been some of the media coverage and, some of the posts through social media, if departments are using pictures of African Americans as target practice, if there is a racist undercurrent within departments, so they're not going to be willing to, get together, let's actually talk about helping. No, because that's about a viewpoint and a perspective that has to be changed too.
Absolutely. I mean, if that kind of thing is going on, then they need to be held accountable. Just a suggestion of racism, they don't belong in the police force. So whoever has a racist point of view or attitude and is seen to have that by somebody, it needs to be, that needs to be held up to the light. It also brings hate on white people in general because it comes back to everybody's racist against us, that kind of thing.
Right.
And that's not helping. There are racists in every culture, basically. There's racism in every culture, but it doesn't have to take over. The rest of us have to stand up together.
But, when you're dealing with it, my issue isn't so much with, that this within, each and everybody. There's classism, there's, sexism and all these isms. I think it becomes very destructive when it's institutionalized. And that's what the police force and the judicial system, unfortunately, has represented for too long. It's institutionalized racism, and that makes it difficult when, in trying to exact change or enact change, when there's these roadblocks are set up. Because on the one hand, it's like, okay, maybe we can have a night, but the account is, officers who have done wrong. We're not talking about, just, miswriting a ticket. We're talking about murder, as has been the case on too many levels with too many of these cases involving, countless and boys and women. It's just like, okay, now it becomes institutional, and that has to be changed. And I think, largely changed on a legislative level. Like people,
absolutely,
the power of the pen is mightier than the sword. So, if it can be expected into law, that's when we will, I think, see actual change. We can continue to write, that's our collective spirit and our collective efforts. But somebody has to pick up the mantle and say, we're not going to stand this anymore. This has got to change. Like case in point, someone just shared on my page recently where I think it was the state of New York, which was looking at legislation to and I want to find that because I don't like to always say, hey, I think this is it.
No, I know what you mean.
What I'm actually talking about, and this is actually where I shared it on a lot of pages, but this is something I got, which actually looked at a legislative move by a major city or state that was looking at, possibly correcting some of the wrongs.